So today I wanted to talk to you guys about Tracer and why I personally believe that she is one of the best and one of the worst heroes in competitive at the same time. Now this is talking just about Overwatch competitive, not about quick play, not about esports, not about anything like that, just competitive. And I will be talking about how she kind of changes from rank to rank, and of course the ranks that she's best at. So do keep that in mind. I think Tracer is a very fluid character compared to a lot of other characters. So before we begin, please do keep that in mind. But with that in mind, let's just kind of get straight onto this. And the first type of group that I want to talk about that will kind of show, that she's been one of the best heroes is the top 500 players. And I think this is a pretty good area to see where she's good and why a lot of people think of Tracer as one of the best heroes in the game. Tracer has always showed up in top 500, no matter the meta. As well, kind of in esports, but I don't want to relate to that too much. But no matter the meta, we're always seeing Tracer in top 500. We're always seeing streamers, players, whatever. There's always Tracer players that can happen to get up there just because the way the character is. So I think that's a pretty easy way to say that she has always been a consistently good character, and she hasn't really needed much buffs or nerfs. She's kind of always stayed the same, which is kind of weird for a character that strong, but I'll tell you why they can't really change it much in a little bit. Another thing I want to say about Tracer, which is why I think she's so good and one of the best heroes almost always, is that Tracer can, if she's good at least, always kill the most meta heroes right now, or at least she can kill the supports that enable those meta heroes. Here's an exact example. So in the last meta, you could pick Tracer, and she wasn't the most meta pick, wasn't too bad. And if you were really good at this character, you get into the enemy backline and you kill their Junkrat. And if you can even go 1-for-1, you still killed one of the strongest heroes in the game right then. And if you have your own Junkrat still alive, he's probably going to beat out the enemy DPS because he's just such a strong hero. And you might be able to win the game just by killing the most meta hero on the enemy team, which a lot of other characters really can't do. Even if Tracer's not meta, she can still at least kind of counter the meta. As well with that, if you don't counter the meta, like let's say you're playing Tracer versus triple tank, pretty obvious that Tracer can't do much there, you can at least kill the supports that are enabling those heroes. You can get into the enemy backline, kill the Ana, go for 1-for-1, or mainly, hopefully, get that one kill and then get out, and then your teammates have a fight where they have an extra healer as the triple tank versus the enemy triple tank. Your team's probably going to win that as well. I think that's just something that's always been good about Tracer and always makes her one of the best heroes. If you can play her amazingly, you can kind of ignore the meta, or at least you can play around the meta and still be able to win a decent amount of games, especially if you're just very skilled with this character. Some final things I want to talk about to why Tracer is just one of the best heroes for competitive in specific is that Tracer, first off, doesn't really need an organized team to play with. Of course, it's nice to play with a dive comp. That's probably your preferred way to play, but you don't really need that, especially at the start of a season when, or I guess right now, when the Mercy Nerfs came through, where nobody really knows what to play and the team comps are all over the place and everything's just being tested out. You can kind of always play Tracer. She can always apply kills to the map, and that's one of the most important things. She's not super specific of a character. While she is a flanker, she can also play kind of next to her team, and especially when the teams are just all over the place, not knowing exactly what they're doing, you can do what you've always been doing, flanking around, getting a few kills, and then getting out. And I think that's kind of important. You don't really have to play directly around your team, and if your team makes mistakes, you can make up for that by getting such a high amount of kills for yourself. Not every DPS can say that. I think especially with characters like Reaper or Junkrat or some other characters that need a bit more protection or that can be sniped a little bit easier, there is that benefit to Tracer. And the other thing I want to talk about competitive in particular, is that if your team does need you to play with them as Tracer, you can. If they have a dive comp, or if the enemy team just keeps pushing directly on your team and you really need somebody to just help you finally finish off the enemy Winston, you as Tracer can go back next to your team, help them out, you have a nice decent amount of damage, and you can probably stay alive. But again, if your team is not doing that great, and if they're just, they're just not doing amazingly, and they need to be carried, you can do that as well. You can play with your team or without your team. And again, not every DPS can do that, and that doesn't really fit through every single meta for most DPSs, but with Tracer, it kind of has. So I think that's probably some of the main reasons why I feel like she's just such a good hero in competitive, and if you're really good at her, why she's such a great hero. Now, I'm going to try to talk about the middle grounds, about her being good and bad at the same time right here, and kind of what goes into that. A different section, I guess. So, a thing right here I want to mention is that Tracer has so much outplay potential. Probably the most in the game. I'm going to argue. You could kind of argue Genji, but I'm going to say Tracer has the most outplay, maneuverability, mobility, everything potential. But it is just that. It's potential. And if you can't get a large amount of that potential out into your game, you won't do much. You're going to be in there. You're going to be trying your best. But if you aren't getting kills, and if you aren't getting one clips, and if you aren't getting wins for your team, you're getting a loss for your team. And that's kind of how it goes. Tracer is a super hard character to play, and I feel like if you aren't playing Tracer at least to like 70 or 60% of her potential, you're kind of just being a detriment to your team. While at the same time, what makes her such a good hero is that if you're playing her at like 80, 90, or 100% of her potential, she can pull off so much more than pretty much any other hero in the game and win that match for you. That's what kind of makes her really unique, and which also makes her problematic, but powerful at the same time. Right here is another thing I wanted to mention. I feel like Tracer, if you're super good at her, is actually a pretty easy character to pull off and to win with. But if you're not that great as her, it's kind of similar to the previous point, it's going to be very hard for you to win a game. If you can't get a one clip as this character in the backline of a fight, and if you just keep going to the end of your backline and you're not getting anything, it's going to be so hard for you to win that game. And with other characters like Reaper or with Soldier or with McCree or something, you can stay next to your team, maybe get one nice ultimate, and there you go, win from there. Tracer doesn't really have that, and her ultimate's a little jank, so you can't really focus on that too much as well. She's kind of easy, I feel like, to win with if you are in a good situation and if you know how to play her again, but if you're not, it's going to be a bit of a pain for you, and it's going to take a lot of practice on this character to get into those good situations. And finally, I'm going to say, a kind of medium ground for Tracer is that she's almost always a good counter for every other DPS in the game, but at the same time, she gets countered by a lot of other DPS. A good example here should be Hanzo. Hanzo can one-shot Tracer, an obvious counter, you'd say, in that situation. But as well, if Tracer's playing well and sneaks around to the Hanzo and gets from the behind, then Tracer can one-shot Hanzo, and that's how it goes with a lot of these DPS characters. She can counter them, but they can also counter her. Now, this isn't every single DPS. Tracer just does amazingly against Reaper and a few other characters. But in general, she at least has a fighting chance against everybody, but most people have a pretty good fighting chance against her, which it isn't really always the case with all the DPS. With some of the DPS, there's just characters that are obviously probably going to win that 1v1, but as Tracer, it's kind of up to you, which is a good thing if you're good as her, but if you're just okay as her, it can be kind of hard. And I feel like in a lot of situations, it's slightly skewed against you as Tracer. You have to be slightly more skilled than the opponent, because she doesn't really, again, have any get-out-of-jail-free cards, or, you know, a huge amount of luck factor going for this character. It's a lot more based off skill, which is kind of hard. Now, we've kind of gone through all the good things, the medium things that are good and bad, but right now I want to talk about some of the reasons why I feel like she, in some cases, can be one of the worst heroes in competitive. And I feel like this is especially for lower elo, but really for anything. So right here, let's just get started with this. The first thing I want to say is that Tracer actually has, generally, a pretty terrible win rate. And when I first looked into this, I was kind of confused. I was like, hey, Tracer's a good character. We've been seeing her in top 500. People have been saying she's great for a long time. But her win rate, for the most part, is never all that amazing. It's never much to look at. It's just okay or below okay. A lot of the times, it's not even as good as, like, Soldier once he's not in the meta, which is kind of weird. And almost always, it's just that she's almost one of the lowest in the entire game. And especially when you go lower and lower and lower elo, her win rate just starts to drop more and more and more. I think the more characters that are just kind of consistent, characters that are just kind of easier, Junkrat, Soldier, McCree again, or maybe even Pharah, they kind of just pick up the slack for Tracer. Because again, if you aren't at a certain level of skill with her, you're kind of hurting your team. And I think that's why her win rate is just so low, because it's honestly a lot harder to become a decent Tracer than to become a decent anything else in a lot of cases. So that's, I guess, one thing about why she's a bad hero in competitive: win rate rise. Another thing about Tracer that kind of hurts you for becoming one of the worst heroes to play in competitive is that oftentimes when you're playing Tracer, it's really easy to get picked as. And if you get picked, you can kind of throw the game for your entire team. And I'm going to say she's probably the easiest hero to throw within the entire game. You have to be positioned so far out all the time, right next to the enemy backline. And if you get hit by one Hanzo arrow, or one anything, or if you just overextend a little bit too much, take a bit too much damage, don't get that one clip, you're just gonna be hurting your team. And that's something that kind of hurts you as a Tracer player. I think that's again why it's so hard for people at a lower level to play this character, because there's no get out of jail free card. If you're not pulling it off, if you're not getting all those stops, you're not going to be doing much for your team. I think I want to say specifically right here is that it seems like in a lot of cases, a Tracer that can't 1 to 2 clip characters or enemies kind of feels completely useless on your team. If you have a Tracer on your team that is just popping off, getting kill after kill after kill, it's obvious that she's going to be just useful for you. But if you take like 3 or 4 clips to kill somebody, I'd say that again, there's almost no reason to really play her over Soldier and McCree, because you're not going to be doing as much damage, as much consistency, and your ultimate won't be really doing quite as much. And finally, I'm going to say a negative about Tracer is that sometimes it can be kind of hard to play her versus triple tank or versus other comps that are just difficult for her to play versus. I'm not going to say that it's like impossible. Of course, you can one-clip the supports and kind of play against it like that. But if you can't one-clip the supports, or at least two-clip them, and if they can kind of fight back a little bit, you aren't going to really be able to do anything against those comps. And a lot of people kind of fall into that, and I think that's what holds a lot of people back as well. And there you go. That's what I feel like is some of the reasons why Tracer is really good and competitive, but as well why in a lot of cases she feels so bad to have on your team in a lot of rounds. And sometimes you might feel that for yourself in both ways. Sometimes you feel like you're doing great, you know exactly what you're going to go for. Sometimes your just aim is amazing, you're getting kill after kill. And sometimes you might just not be doing way too well at all. And these are my reasons to why you might be doing that. But anyways, as always, guys, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you have your own opinion, please leave that down in the comment section down below. As well, if you want me to talk about any character in the future, please leave that down there as well. I just kind of want to talk about certain characters right now before I do some more face cam videos that I'm also planning to do in the near future about rank. So I guess kind of get excited for both those. Leave a like if you want to see more stuff like this in the future. Press the subscribe or the notification button. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day.